I'm not the girl you were sent for, she whispered, but the Modoc war chief refused to let her go. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The air was thick with tension as the Modoc warriors gathered around their chief, standing in a circle, their faces hardened by years of conflict. The sun hung low over the arid landscape, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain of Northern California. The sound of hooves echoed from the distance, signaling the arrival of a lone rider. A woman, bound and bruised, her hands tightly shackled, was forced into the center of the camp. She had no idea how she had ended up here, in the heart of the Modoc people's territory. Only a few days earlier, she had been fleeing for her life, desperate to escape a forced marriage to a ruthless outlaw. The men who had captured her were merciless, dragging her through the wilds of the frontier with no intention of showing her any kindness. But now, she was standing before a different kind of man, one who seemed to radiate power and authority without a single word being spoken. The Modoc war chief, his features sharp and unreadable, looked down at the woman with a gaze that seemed to pierce through her very soul. His people had fought for this land, and they did not take kindly to outsiders. Yet, there was something about her, a fire, a stubbornness, that made him hesitate. She was not the typical captive. She was not the girl they had been sent for, yet in his eyes, she was something more. The warriors murmured amongst themselves, their voices low and wary. Some of them wanted to see her punished, to show their strength and dominance over anyone who dared enter their territory. But the war chief remained silent, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. The woman, shaking with fear and exhaustion, lifted her head and locked eyes with him. She knew she wasn't meant to be here. She wasn't the woman they had been expecting. She wasn't the prize they had hoped for. She was just a desperate, runaway bride with nothing left to lose. I'm not the girl you were sent for, she whispered, her voice trembling but defiant. The words hung in the air like a challenge, one that was met with an unexpected response. The Modoc war chief's expression softened for a brief moment, as if something deep within him recognized the truth in her words. He raised his hand, signaling for the warriors to step back. His voice, deep and commanding, finally broke the silence. You are not what they expected, he said, his gaze never leaving hers. But you are mine now. The woman's heart pounded in her chest, the meaning of his words sinking in. This was not the rescue she had imagined, nor the fate she had hoped for. But in the Modoc war chief's eyes, she could see something more, a promise, an unspoken bond that could not be broken. She had no choice but to accept it, and with it, the realization that her life had just taken an irreversible turn. She was no longer a mere runaway bride. She was now part of something much greater. She was now bound to the Modoc tribe, and in that moment, she realized that her true story was only just beginning. I am not the girl you were sent for. The words still echoed in her mind as the days passed. The Modoc war chief had spared her, but the question of what came next hung heavy in the air like a storm waiting to break. She was no longer the runaway bride desperate to escape an outlaw's grip. She was something else now, something the chief had claimed for his own. She had no idea what that truly meant, but one thing was clear. Her life had taken a turn she could never have anticipated. The night had fallen, and she sat near the fire, the warm glow casting shadows over the rugged landscape. The chief, still silent, sat across from her. His piercing eyes seemed to watch every movement she made, but his expression remained unreadable. The air between them was thick with tension. Around them, the camp was alive with the quiet murmurs of the tribe. The warriors had returned from their patrols, their faces hard from the day's journey, but their eyes flickered to her in a way she didn't understand. Some of the younger warriors, those who had been eager for a fight, looked at her with suspicion, while others seemed intrigued, as though her presence among them was a mystery they couldn't quite solve. She could feel the weight of their stares, but she kept her gaze low, her hands tightly clutching the fabric of her dress. It was the only thing she had left that was hers. Her heart beat faster as the chief finally spoke, his deep voice breaking the silence. You are safe here, he said, his words slow and deliberate. But you must understand that you are now part of this tribe. The Modoc do not abandon their own. She lifted her head slightly, her eyes meeting his. Part of the tribe? She repeated, her voice shaking. What does that mean? His eyes softened for the first time since their meeting. It means that you are under my protection, he said. And in turn, you will protect the tribe. You will fight for us if the time comes. She didn't know what to say. She wasn't a warrior. She wasn't even a woman who had ever thought of herself as anything more than a pawn in the hands of men. She had been nothing but a pawn for so long, first to her father, then to the outlaw who had sought to claim her as his bride. Now, she was a prisoner in a different kind of game, one that she didn't understand. The chief seemed to read the uncertainty in her eyes. He rose slowly, his presence commanding the attention of everyone around the fire. Come, he said. I will show you what it means to belong. The next few days were a blur of strange rituals and customs that seemed foreign to her. The Modoc people lived in harmony with the land, hunting, fishing, and gathering as they had for centuries. Their strength lay not just in their warriors, but in their unity. She was expected to learn their ways, to become part of their daily life. But the more she learned, the more she felt like an outsider. The women of the tribe were kind to her, but there was a distance between them that she couldn't bridge. They didn't trust her, not yet. And the warriors, well, they weren't sure what to make of her either. She wasn't like the women they knew, strong and capable of handling the harshness of the world. She wasn't one of their own. Every time she tried to fit in, to learn the ways of the Modoc, she felt more and more like a stranger. Yet, in the quiet moments, she would catch the chief's gaze. His eyes, dark and intense, always seemed to be watching her, as if he was waiting for something, waiting for her to change. Days turned into weeks, and she had yet to fully accept her place in the tribe. Her mind was still trapped in the life she had left behind. The life of a captive, of a woman with no choice, no voice. But the chief's words still echoed in her mind. You are part of this tribe now. You will fight for us. She didn't know how she could possibly fight for a tribe that wasn't even her own. But one night, as she lay in the darkness of her tent, listening to the sounds of the camp, something inside her shifted. She realized that she wasn't just a victim of circumstance anymore. She wasn't just the woman they had claimed for their own. She was strong. She had survived everything life had thrown at her. And now, she would survive here, in this new world. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. She would not let the Modoc war chief's protection go unchallenged. She would prove herself, not just to him, but to herself. And so, as the days passed, she began to change. She trained with the other women, learning their ways of survival. She trained with the warriors, learning how to fight with the strength she never knew she had. The chief watched her progress, his gaze never leaving her. And as she grew stronger, so too did her resolve. She was no longer the girl who had been forced into a life she didn't want. She was a woman, a warrior, and she would fight for the Modoc tribe as fiercely as any of them. The chief's protection was not a cage. It was a promise, and she would prove worthy of it. I am no longer the same woman who stumbled into this tribe, lost and afraid. Days turned into weeks, and with every passing moment, the woman who had once fled in terror now stood taller, stronger. She had trained hard, learning the ways of the Modoc. She had fought alongside them, not just in battle, but in the small tasks that bound them together as a tribe. Every day was a challenge, every night a reminder of the life she had left behind. But with every challenge, she grew, and with every test, her bond with the tribe deepened. The chief had been watching her closely, his gaze never straying far from her during the days of her training. He had not spoken much to her, but his presence was a constant. And, in those silent moments, she had come to understand something that she hadn't before. The Modoc war chief was not a man of many words, but his actions spoke louder than any command could. He had not only saved her life, but had made her part of his world, a world where strength, loyalty, and honor meant everything. Her life with the Modoc was not perfect. The other women in the tribe still kept their distance. They had seen women like her before, outsiders, taken in, but never fully trusted. The warriors were no different. Many of them looked at her with skepticism, some even with disdain, seeing her as an outsider who didn't belong. But the chief's actions had spoken for her. He had given her protection, and in return, She had fought beside his people, learning their ways, taking part in their daily life. It wasn't easy, but it was a life worth living. The day came when the tribe was called to arms. A band of settlers, who had been encroaching on the Modoc's lands, were nearing their territory. They had been warned before, but this time, they came with force, bringing their weapons and their intentions clear, to claim the land that was rightfully the Modoc's. The tribe was ready, but the tension in the air was palpable. The chief gathered the warriors, and for the first time since her arrival, he called on her. She stood before him, her heart racing, her palms sweating. "You are part of this tribe now," he said, his voice steady. "You fight with us today, as one of us." The words struck her like a blow. She had known that this moment would come, but hearing it from him, in front of the entire tribe, made it real. She was no longer an outsider, no longer just a woman taken in by their protection. She was a warrior. The thought made her heart race with a mixture of fear and excitement. She had been trained, yes, but she had never fought in a battle like this before. This was not some small skirmish. This was war. But she had no choice now. She had sworn to protect this tribe, and now, she would prove that she was worthy of the trust they had placed in her. As the warriors prepared for the fight, she stood alongside them, her bow in hand, her mind focused. The chief looked at her one last time before the battle began, his eyes unwavering. "Do not falter," he said, his voice low. "You fight for the Modoc. You fight for your people." She nodded, her breath steadying. The battle was fierce. The settlers, though outnumbered, were well-armed and desperate. The Modoc warriors fought with all their strength, and she fought alongside them, doing everything she had learned. She moved with the precision she had been taught, striking with the power of someone who had been trained, not just as a fighter, but as part of something larger than herself. It was in that moment, amidst the chaos and the bloodshed, that she realized the truth. She was not just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for her place in this tribe, for the honor of the Modoc, and for herself. She fought not just to prove her worth, but because she had come to understand something fundamental about her own strength. She had been lost, once. But now, she was found. The battle was long, but in the end, the Modoc emerged victorious. The settlers were driven off, their hopes of claiming the land shattered. The tribe had won, but the cost had been high. Many warriors had fallen, and the scars of battle would remain for years to come. As the chief stood at the head of the tribe, looking over the battlefield, his eyes met hers once again. For the first time, he allowed himself a slight nod, acknowledging her as one of his own. She had fought, and she had proven herself worthy of the Modoc's protection, worthy of the trust the chief had placed in her. She was no longer the woman who had been saved. She was the woman who had fought for something greater, for a people, for a cause, and for herself. I stood by the fire, the smoke curling into the air as the heat from the flames warmed my face. It had been weeks since the battle with the settlers. The wounds had begun to heal, both physical and emotional, but the peace was fragile. The chief had not spoken much to me since the battle, but his gaze, when it met mine, had shifted. There was a quiet understanding between us now, a bond that had been forged in the fires of battle. But with the peace came a new challenge. The Modoc were not without enemies. There were whispers from neighboring tribes, rumors of threats from further to the south. I had proven myself in battle, but I knew that there were still many who questioned whether I truly belonged. The chief had said I was part of his tribe, but being part of something was not always the same as being accepted. I had earned the warriors' respect, but the women still held back. The Modoc women were strong, proud, and fiercely independent. They had no need for outsiders in their circle, but I was determined to change that. I had spent my days learning their ways, hunting, gathering, and learning their customs. It wasn't easy, but it was the life I had chosen. I had no other choice. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the chief called me. His voice, deep and calm, cut through the air. "Come with me," he said, and I followed him without question. We walked through the camp in silence, the sound of our footsteps muted by the soft earth beneath us. The firelight flickered in the distance, casting long shadows over the tents and the warriors who had gathered around. "You've proven yourself in battle," the chief said, his voice steady. "But there is another test for you." I looked at him, confused. "Another test?" I asked. He nodded, his face unreadable. You must prove yourself to the tribe. How? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He paused, looking at me with those intense eyes. By facing the trial of the Modoc. A trial of strength, courage, and honor. I felt my heart race. The trial of the Modoc was a sacred tradition. Only those who were deemed worthy could participate. It was a test of everything the tribe valued: loyalty, bravery, and the will to survive. What do I have to do? I asked, my voice trembling. You must face the challenge of the wild, he said simply. The mountains to the north are dangerous, full of predators and obstacles. If you survive the night in those mountains, you will prove yourself to the tribe. The challenge was clear. The mountains to the north were known for their harsh conditions and the wild animals that roamed there. It would be a test of endurance, of survival. It was the ultimate trial. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I had faced fear before. I had faced death, and I had survived. I had fought for my life and fought for the Modoc. I would prove myself once again. The chief led me to the edge of the camp, where the warriors had gathered, watching silently. He handed me a knife, its blade gleaming in the fading light. This will be your only weapon, he said. You must rely on your instincts, your strength, and your will to survive. I nodded, accepting the knife. My heart pounded in my chest, but I knew I could do this. The chief's words echoed in my mind. You fight for the Modoc. You fight for your people. With that, I turned and walked into the wilderness, leaving the safety of the camp behind. The air grew colder as I ascended the mountain path, the wind biting at my skin. The trees were thick and dark, their branches swaying in the wind. The ground was uneven, the rocks slippery underfoot. The only sound was the crunch of gravel beneath my boots and the occasional howl of the wind. As I climbed higher, the darkness deepened. The mountain was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. There was a sense of danger in the air, a feeling that I wasn't alone. I could feel the eyes of predators watching me. The wind howled louder as the night settled in. I had no fire, no shelter, just the knife in my hand and the strength in my body. I pressed on, every step harder than the last. The night seemed endless. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves made my heart race. I could hear animals moving in the distance, the soft padding of paws against the earth. But I did not falter. I pressed on. I had come this far, and I would not turn back. The hours stretched into what felt like days, but I kept going, driven by the thought of the tribe, driven by the promise I had made. By the time dawn broke, I was exhausted, bruised, and bloodied. But I had made it. I had survived the night in the mountains. I had proven myself. As I made my way back to the camp, I saw the chief waiting for me, his expression unreadable. I stood before him, breathing heavily, my body aching. But I stood tall. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. You have done it, he said. You are one of us now, truly. The warriors and women gathered around, their eyes no longer filled with doubt. They had seen my strength, my courage, and now they accepted me as one of their own. The trial had been more than a test of survival. It had been a test of belonging. And I had passed. I stood at the edge of the camp, the morning sun casting long shadows over the Modoc land. The trial was over, and I had been accepted, but the sense of belonging still felt like a distant dream. I had proven myself in battle and survived the wilds of the mountain, yet there was still a part of me that felt like an outsider. The other women of the tribe had started to warm to me, their cold stares softening over time, but I knew it would take more than survival to truly be one of them. The warriors no longer looked at me with suspicion, but I could see the lingering doubt in their eyes. They had seen my strength in battle, but strength was only part of what it meant to be a true Modoc. I knew that now. The chief had given me his protection, but that was not enough. I had to prove that I could live as they did, not just fight as they did. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the chief called for a council. The warriors gathered around, their faces serious as they spoke in hushed tones. I joined them, taking my place beside the fire, the warmth of the flames comforting against the evening chill. The chief stood before us, his presence commanding the room. His gaze swept over the warriors, then rested on me. We have peace for now, he said, his voice steady. But there are those who would see us broken, those who would see our land taken. We must remain vigilant. The warriors nodded, their faces grim. I could sense the tension in the air, the weight of their words hanging heavy. This was not just about survival anymore. This was about protecting everything they had built, everything they had fought for. The chief turned to me. "You have proven your courage," he said, his voice soft but firm. "But there is more to being a warrior than fighting. There is wisdom, strategy, and leadership. I will need you in the coming days." I felt a knot form in my stomach. Leadership. It was one thing to fight beside them, another to lead them. I had spent my life running, hiding, trying to survive. I had never imagined I would be asked to lead. But there was no turning back now. I nodded, my heart racing. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. The chief smiled, a rare sight, his eyes softening for the briefest moment. "We will scout the enemy's movements," he said. "We need to know where they are, what they plan. I will need you to help guide the scouts, to plan the route, to read the land as we do." His words hit me like a blow. To help guide the scouts. I had learned the ways of the Modoc, but I had never imagined I would be called upon to lead such an important mission. I had to step up, not just for myself, but for the tribe, for the chief who had believed in me when no one else had. The next day, we set out. The land was rugged, the terrain uneven, but I had learned to read it. The Modoc had always lived in harmony with their environment, and now I was part of that. The scouts moved swiftly, their eyes keen for any signs of the enemy. We traveled through forests and across barren plains, the air thick with anticipation. As the day wore on, I could feel the weight of the mission on my shoulders. The responsibility was immense, and I was not sure I was ready. But as we reached the top of a hill, I saw the first signs of movement below. A group of riders, moving quickly, heading in our direction. I signaled to the scouts to take cover, my mind racing. We had to act fast. We had to plan our next move carefully. The chief's voice echoed in my mind. Strategy, wisdom, leadership. I took a deep breath and gave the signal to move. We surrounded the riders, cutting off their path, forcing them into a trap. The battle that followed was swift, but intense. The enemy was fierce, but the Modoc were stronger. We fought with precision, each warrior knowing their role, each one moving with the grace and power that had become second nature. I fought alongside them, my heart steady, my mind clear. The battle ended with the enemy retreating, their plans disrupted, their forces scattered. We had won, but the cost had been high. There were wounded among us, some warriors who would never fight again. But we had done it. We had protected our land, our people. The chief stood beside me as we surveyed the aftermath. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something more than the leader of the tribe. I saw a man who respected me, who trusted me. "You did well," he said, his voice quiet. "You are a warrior of the Modoc now." The words sank in. I was no longer just a woman who had been saved. I was no longer the outsider. I had earned my place. I had proven that I could lead, that I could fight, and that I was part of something greater than myself. The chief's words rang in my ears, but it was the tribe's acceptance that truly mattered. I had found my place, my purpose, among the Modoc. And this, I realized, was just the beginning of my journey. I stood at the edge of the camp, the wind biting at my skin as I looked out over the land that had become my home. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. The Modoc people had gained a hard-fought victory, but there were still threats on the horizon. The chief had spoken of it in the council, and the words haunted me as I prepared for what came next. I had earned my place among the warriors, but now I was being asked to take on a different role, one that would test me in ways I had never imagined. The chief called me to his side one evening as the camp settled into the quiet of night. The flames of the fire flickered, casting long shadows over his weathered face. "The time has come to strengthen our position," he said, his voice low and steady. "We cannot rely solely on force. We need to gain allies, to make our presence known beyond the borders of our land." I nodded, unsure of where this conversation was leading. "I will send you to speak with the neighboring tribes," the chief continued, his eyes narrowing with purpose. "We need to form alliances if we are to survive. You have proven your strength in battle, and now you must prove your ability to lead in peace." The weight of his words settled on my shoulders like a heavy cloak. I had never imagined that I would be asked to negotiate, to speak on behalf of the Modoc people. My mind raced with doubt. What did I know of diplomacy, of forming alliances? I had only ever known how to survive. But the chief's trust in me was clear, and I knew I could not refuse. The next day, I set out with a small group of warriors, our path leading us through the dense forests and across the wide plains that separated the Modoc from the neighboring tribes. The journey was long, the air thick with anticipation. I had never ventured far beyond our territory, and as we traveled, I began to wonder what I was really stepping into. The world beyond the Modoc's land was unfamiliar, filled with dangers and uncertainties. But I had no choice but to face it. As we neared the camp of the nearest tribe, the Shoshone, the tension in the air grew thick. The Shoshone were known for their fierce warriors and their distrust of outsiders. We were strangers in their land, and I knew that the meeting ahead would not be easy. We approached the Shoshone camp cautiously, our horses moving slowly through the rocky terrain. The warriors of the Shoshone stood watch, their eyes narrowed as they assessed our arrival. The leader of the Shoshone, a tall man with sharp features and a battle-worn face, stepped forward to meet us. His gaze was cold, calculating, but there was something in his eyes that made me hesitate. He was a man who knew the value of strength, and he would not be swayed easily. "What brings the Modoc to our land?" he asked, his voice rough but steady. I stepped forward, my heart pounding in my chest. I had no choice but to speak. "We seek an alliance," I said, my voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at my insides. "The Modoc are strong, but we cannot survive alone. We seek your support, your strength, in the battles ahead." The Shoshone leader studied me for a long moment, his eyes unreadable. "An alliance?" he repeated. "What do the Modoc offer in return?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. I had no answer at first. What could the Modoc offer in return? We had no wealth, no land to trade. But then I thought of the battle we had fought, of the strength we had shown. We had something more valuable than material wealth. We had honor. We had courage. We had a way of life that was worth protecting. "We offer our loyalty," I said, my voice firm. "Our strength in battle. We stand together, as one, against any who threaten our way of life." The Shoshone leader's expression softened, ever so slightly. It was a small change, but it was enough to give me hope. "Your words are strong," he said, his voice no longer as harsh. "But words alone are not enough. Prove your strength, prove your loyalty, and we will see if the Modoc are worthy of our trust." The challenge was clear. He was asking for a test of strength, of loyalty. But what did that truly mean? I did not know, but I had no choice but to face it. I spent the next few days among the Shoshone, learning their ways, their customs. They were different from the Modoc in many ways, but their strength and pride were no different. The time came when the Shoshone leader called me to face my test. A group of their warriors had been ambushed by a rival tribe in the hills to the west. The Shoshone wanted to know if we could fight beside them, if we could stand together in the face of danger. It was a test of loyalty. It was a test of strength. I did not hesitate. The Modoc and Shoshone rode together, their warriors united by the same purpose. We fought alongside each other, our arrows and weapons flying through the air as we struck at the rival tribe. It was a battle that tested us all, but in the end, we emerged victorious. The Shoshone leader stood beside me, his eyes filled with respect. "You have proven your loyalty," he said. "You have shown us the strength of the Modoc. We will stand with you." The alliance was forged in the heat of battle, solidified by blood and honor. As the Modoc and Shoshone camped together that night, I realized that I had crossed a threshold. I was no longer just a warrior of the Modoc. I was a leader, a woman who had earned the trust of not only her people but of those she had once seen as strangers. I had proven that loyalty, honor, and strength were the bonds that held us together, and that was all I needed to know. I stood beside the chief, overlooking the valley where the Shoshone and Modoc had camped together. The air was still, and the scent of pine and earth hung heavily around us. Our alliance had been forged in blood, but now the real test began. The rival tribe, the Paiute, had been watching our every move, and we knew it would not be long before they came for us. The chief had asked me to stay by his side as we planned our next move. The council had spoken, and the warriors were ready. But the feeling of unease still lingered in my chest. I had faced danger before, but now, it felt different. There was a certain heaviness to the air, as if the land itself was waiting for something. I could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on me, but I pushed it aside. There was no time for doubt. I had proven my strength, my loyalty, and now it was time to prove my resolve. The days passed quickly. We moved through the rugged terrain, our warriors alert, our horses swift. We were searching for the Paiute, hunting them before they could strike at us. I had spent weeks learning the ways of the land, reading the signs that nature left behind. It was a skill I had acquired through necessity, and it was now one of my greatest assets. The chief had taught me much about strategy, about the subtle ways in which a warrior could manipulate the land to their advantage. As we drew closer to the Paiute's territory, the tension grew. The warriors spoke little, their faces hard with determination. Even the women, who had once held their distance, now moved with a quiet purpose. They were preparing for battle, just as the men were. It was a strange feeling to be part of something so much larger than myself. I had always been an outsider, but now, I was part of something greater, a tribe, a family. The chief had entrusted me with leadership, and I would not fail him. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, we stopped to rest. The fire crackled in the stillness of the night, and I sat beside the chief. His gaze was fixed on the stars, his face unreadable. I had learned over the past months that the chief did not speak often, but when he did, his words carried weight. "You have done well," he said, his voice low. "The tribe trusts you." The words were simple, but they carried a depth that I could not fully understand. "I will not let them down," I replied, my voice steady. The chief turned to face me, his eyes searching mine. "This is not about what you can do alone," he said. "It is about what we can do together. The Modoc do not fight for personal glory. We fight for each other, for the land, for our people." I nodded, understanding the truth in his words. It was a lesson I had learned in the battles we had fought. We were stronger when we stood united. The next morning, we set out once again, the air cold and crisp as we moved deeper into the Paiute's territory. I could feel the weight of the upcoming battle in my bones. The land felt different here, the earth beneath my feet harder, the wind colder. It was a place of quiet danger, a place where enemies could be lurking behind every rock. We traveled in silence, our horses moving swiftly through the dense forest. As we neared a clearing, I saw a movement up ahead, a group of Paiute warriors, moving quickly, their faces painted for battle. The moment of confrontation had arrived. The chief signaled for the warriors to halt, and we took cover behind the trees. The Paiute were close now, their numbers more than we had anticipated. We were outnumbered, but we had the element of surprise on our side. The chief turned to me, his eyes sharp with purpose. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice calm, but his gaze intense. I nodded, my heart racing. "I am ready." The chief smiled slightly, his expression softening for the briefest moment. "Then let us fight." With that, the warriors moved into position, their bodies blending with the landscape as they prepared for the ambush. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I readied myself for the battle ahead. We were outnumbered, but we had the advantage of being together. The Paiute warriors, unaware of our position, continued to move through the clearing. The tension was unbearable, each second stretching into an eternity. Then, with a signal from the chief, we struck. The warriors moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine, surrounding the Paiute and cutting off their escape. The battle was fierce, the clash of weapons ringing through the air as the two tribes collided. I fought with all the strength I had, my knife flashing in the sunlight as I struck at the enemy. The Paiute were strong, but they were unprepared for the power of the Modoc. We fought with everything we had, each blow a reminder of what we were fighting for. The battle raged on, but the tide began to turn in our favor. The Paiute, caught off guard by our strength and unity, began to retreat. As the last of them fled into the forest, I stood among the warriors, my breath coming in heavy gasps. We had won. The chief approached me, his gaze steady. "You fought well," he said, his voice proud. "You have proven yourself once again." I felt a sense of pride swell in my chest, but it was not just for myself. It was for the Modoc, for the tribe that had taken me in and trusted me. We had stood together, and together, we had triumphed. The battle was over, but the work was just beginning. The chief looked out over the battlefield, his expression thoughtful. "This is only one victory," he said. "There will be more challenges ahead. But as long as we stand together, we will not falter." I nodded, my resolve stronger than ever. We had faced the Paiute, and we had won. But there were many more battles to fight, and I would be ready for each one. I stood among the warriors, the smell of smoke and the distant sounds of the battlefield fading as the aftermath of the fight settled around us. The Modoc and Shoshone had struck hard at the Paiute, and the enemy had been driven back, their strength shattered by our unity and resolve. But even in the victory, the weight of the chief's words lingered in my mind. This is only one victory. The night after the battle was quiet, the kind of stillness that seemed unnatural after so much bloodshed. The warriors gathered around the fire, their faces illuminated by the flames as they spoke in low tones, recounting the battle, their victories, their losses. I had proven myself on the battlefield, but there was still much to learn, still much to prove. The chief had said there would be more challenges ahead, and I knew he spoke the truth. There was always another battle, another test of strength and loyalty. The next morning, we broke camp early, the sounds of the warriors preparing for the journey ahead filling the air. We had made our mark on the Paiute, but there were other tribes, other dangers waiting for us. We rode hard, the land stretching out before us like an endless sea of dirt and rock. The sky was clear, the sun shining hot above us, but there was an unease in the air, a sense that something was watching us. The chief, as always, led the way. His steady presence was a constant in the chaos that swirled around us. He had become a symbol of strength for the Modoc, and now, he had entrusted me with a new task. I had fought for the tribe, I had earned their trust, but now it was time to prove that I could lead in more ways than one. We reached the edge of the valley by midday. The land here was harsh, the soil dry and cracked, but there was a sense of quiet power to the place, a stillness that reminded me of the mountains where I had faced my trial. The chief spoke quietly, his voice carrying across the wind. We will make our stand here. The warriors dismounted, setting up camp in the shadow of a rocky outcrop. The Modoc had lived off this land for generations, but now, with the growing tensions with other tribes, the land had become both a refuge and a battleground. As the days passed, I found myself taking on more responsibility. I was no longer just the woman who had fought alongside the warriors. I was becoming a leader in my own right, helping to strategize the defense of our land, working alongside the chief to plan our movements. It was a role I had never imagined, but it felt right. The Modoc had accepted me, and now I had a duty to them. But with the duty came pressure. There were whispers among the warriors. Some of them had never truly accepted me, still unsure whether a woman could lead as effectively as a man. They had seen my strength, but strength was only part of what was needed. The next test would come soon. Word had spread that a coalition of tribes was gathering against us, led by a warrior chief who had once been a formidable foe to the Modoc. The chief, calm as ever, gathered the warriors in the evening to discuss the threat. I stood beside him, my heart beating faster as the reality of our situation sank in. We were outnumbered, and if the coalition decided to attack, we would have little choice but to defend our land with everything we had. The chief's eyes swept across the gathered warriors, his voice steady as he spoke. We will not be cowed by numbers. We will stand firm, and we will defend what is ours. The land is our strength, and as long as we stand together, no enemy can take it from us. The warriors murmured in agreement, their faces hardening with resolve. But I could see the doubt in their eyes. This was the test, the true test of what we were made of. I could feel the weight of the responsibility on my shoulders, and for the first time since I had joined the Modoc, I was unsure. Could we win? Could I lead them to victory? The days passed quickly, and soon, we found ourselves at the edge of the valley once again, watching as the enemy coalition made their move. They came in waves, their warriors moving in tight formations, their battle cries echoing through the air. But the Modoc were ready. The land was ours, and we knew it better than anyone. We struck first, using the terrain to our advantage, hitting the enemy with swift, deadly precision. The battle was brutal, the clash of weapons and the cries of warriors filling the air. I fought beside the chief, my blade flashing in the sunlight, my heart pounding in my chest. We had fought many battles, but this one felt different. There was something more at stake now, the future of the Modoc. I moved through the battlefield with purpose, my mind clear, my actions decisive. The chief had trusted me, and I would not let him down. The enemy was strong, but they were scattered. The Modoc, united in purpose, were stronger. Slowly, the tide turned in our favor. The warriors fell back, retreating into the hills as we pursued them. striking with the fury of a people defending their home. As the sun began to set, the last of the enemy forces retreated, leaving the Modoc victorious once again. The chief stood beside me, his eyes meeting mine. "You did well," he said, his voice filled with quiet pride. "You led us to victory." In that moment, I knew that I had proven myself, not just as a warrior, but as a leader. The Modoc had trusted me, and I had earned their respect. The battle was over, but the war would continue. But as long as we stood together, we would always fight for what was ours. I stood before the chief, the wind rustling through the trees as the aftermath of our latest battle settled into a quiet, uneasy peace. The coalition of tribes that had threatened us was in retreat, their forces scattered across the rugged land. We had won, but I could feel the tension still hanging thick in the air. The Modoc people had faced many enemies in the past, but the stakes had never been this high. We had proved ourselves on the battlefield, but now the true test was beginning. The chief stood beside me, his eyes scanning the horizon as the last remnants of the enemy disappeared into the distance. His face was unreadable, but I could see the weight of the decision he had to make. "We cannot let our guard down," he said, his voice low and steady. "The war is not over. The tribes that came against us will regroup. We need to prepare for the next wave." I nodded, my mind racing. The victory had been hard-earned, but I knew the battle for our land was far from won. The chief had entrusted me with the responsibility of leading our warriors, but now I felt the full weight of that responsibility pressing down on me. We had no choice but to stand together, to protect our people from the growing threat that surrounded us. The days that followed were filled with preparation. The warriors practiced their combat skills, strengthening their resolve as they trained for the battles ahead. The women of the tribe worked together to mend the warriors' gear, while others gathered food and supplies, ensuring that we were ready for whatever came next. I spent my days at the chief's side, helping to strategize, to plan the movements of our people. The weight of leadership was heavy, but I had come to understand the importance of what we were doing. We were not just defending our land. We were defending our way of life. The Modoc were more than just warriors. We were a community, bound together by our shared history, our traditions, and our loyalty to each other. As the days passed, the threat of another attack loomed ever closer. The scouts reported increased movement among the enemy tribes, and we knew it was only a matter of time before they would strike again. The chief called for a council, summoning the leaders of the Modoc warriors to discuss our next move. As I stood with the chief, I could feel the weight of the moment. The future of the Modoc people was in our hands. The council was tense, the air thick with the tension of uncertainty. The warriors spoke of their fears, their doubts, but the chief remained calm, his voice steady as he addressed them. "We will stand firm," he said, his voice carrying across the gathered warriors. "The Modoc do not falter. We do not bend to the will of others. We fight for our land, for our people, and for the future of our tribe." His words were like a spark that ignited the warriors' resolve. They nodded, their faces hardening with determination. The chief turned to me, his eyes meeting mine. "You will lead the warriors to the northern pass," he said, his voice unwavering. "We will need your strength, your courage, and your wisdom in the days ahead." I felt my heart race, my mind spinning with the weight of his words. I had led our warriors before, but this was different. This time, the stakes were higher. This time, we would face our greatest challenge yet. But I knew that I had no choice. I had been trusted with this responsibility, and I would not let the Modoc down. The next morning, we set out, our warriors moving with purpose as we made our way toward the northern pass. The terrain was rugged, the path steep and treacherous, but we pressed on, determined to hold our ground. As we approached the pass, the tension in the air grew thicker. The warriors were alert, their eyes scanning the land for any sign of the enemy. We knew they were out there, watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike. And then, as the sun dipped below the horizon, we saw them. A large force of enemy warriors, moving swiftly through the trees, their weapons gleaming in the fading light. We had no time to prepare, no time to think. The battle began almost immediately, the clash of weapons ringing through the air as the two forces collided. I fought alongside the chief, my heart pounding in my chest as I moved with precision, striking at the enemy with all the strength I had. The warriors of the Modoc fought with everything they had, their determination unwavering as they defended our land. The battle was brutal, the clash of steel and the cries of warriors filling the air. But we held our ground. The enemy, though fierce, was no match for the Modoc. We fought with unity, with purpose, and slowly, the tide began to turn in our favor. As the battle raged on, I found myself standing alongside the chief once more, our eyes meeting across the chaos. His face was bloodied, his clothes torn, but his resolve was unbroken. "We fight for our people," he said, his voice carrying across the battlefield. "We fight for what is ours." The words were simple, but they were all I needed to hear. In that moment, I knew that we would not lose. The Modoc would never fall. We would stand, we would fight, and we would win. The battle ended with the enemy retreating, their forces scattered, their plans shattered. The chief turned to me, his eyes filled with pride. "You led us well," he said. "You have proven yourself once again." I stood before him, my chest heaving with exhaustion, but I felt a sense of pride swell in my chest. The Modoc had triumphed once more, and we had done it together. We had protected our land, our people, and our future. As the sun rose over the battlefield, I knew that the war was not yet over, but we had proven that the Modoc would never be broken. And as long as we stood together, there was nothing we could not overcome. I had never seen the land so still. The battle was over, the sounds of war fading into the quiet of the morning. The earth was scarred, the trees and rocks bearing the marks of our struggle, but the Modoc had emerged victorious once again. It was a hard-won victory, but it had come at a cost. The warriors, though proud, wore the exhaustion of battle in their eyes. The women worked tirelessly to tend to the wounded, the air heavy with the weight of what had transpired. But as the sun rose higher, there was a feeling in the air, a sense of something coming. The chief stood beside me, his presence as commanding as ever, but I could see the quiet weariness in his gaze. He had seen many battles in his time, but there was something about this one, something that told him the war was far from over. "We have won today," he said, his voice low. "But there will be more. There will always be more. The land is never truly ours until we can keep it." I nodded, my heart heavy with the knowledge of what that meant. The peace we had fought so hard for was fragile. The enemy was not finished, and the alliances we had built were already being tested. I had seen it in the eyes of the warriors, in the way they moved with purpose, but also with the recognition that every victory had a price. The chief turned to me, his gaze steady, his voice softer now. "You have proven yourself time and again, but there is one final test. A test not of strength, but of trust, of unity." I met his eyes, confusion flickering in my chest. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice almost a whisper. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked across the camp, his expression unreadable. "The next challenge will not be won by force," he said, finally turning to me. "It will be won by the people. You will need to unite the Modoc and the Shoshone, to hold the alliances we've forged and make them strong. If we cannot stand together in peace, we will be divided. And that will be our greatest weakness." The words hit me like a blow. I had fought beside the warriors. I had led them in battle, and I had earned their respect. But to unite the Modoc and Shoshone, two tribes with their own ways, their own histories, it seemed impossible. Yet, the chief believed in me. He trusted me. The weight of that trust settled on my shoulders, but I knew there was no turning back. The Modoc and Shoshone had fought together, side by side. But peace was always a fragile thing. We had fought for survival, but now we needed to fight for harmony, for unity. I spent the following days moving between the camps, speaking to the leaders of both the Modoc and the Shoshone. It was harder than I had imagined. The tension between the two tribes was still palpable, despite the victories we had shared. Old grudges lingered, unspoken but felt in every glance. I could see the distrust in the eyes of some of the warriors, the suspicion in the whispers of the women. It was going to take more than just words to bridge the gap between us. But I had learned one thing over the past months. Unity was not about forcing people to agree. It was about building trust, piece by piece. I spent time with both the Modoc and the Shoshone, listening to their stories, sharing in their customs. I learned about their histories, their struggles, and their dreams. I learned that despite our differences, we were not so far apart. We had the same hopes, the same desire to protect our people, to honor the land. Slowly, the walls between us began to break down. The warriors began to speak more freely, their conversations less guarded. The women of the tribe began to share their knowledge, their laughter, and their strength. It wasn't easy, and there were times when it felt like we were taking one step forward only to be pushed 2 steps back. But with each day, the bonds between the Modoc and Shoshone grew stronger. I could see the change in the faces of the people, in the way they began to trust one another. The chief watched from a distance, his gaze never wavering, but his expression softened with pride. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, we gathered for a final council. The chief stood at the head of the fire, his voice calm, but commanding. "The Modoc and Shoshone stand together," he said. "We are no longer two tribes. We are one, and as one, we will face the challenges ahead." The warriors of both tribes stood tall, their faces proud, their hearts strong. The women, who had once held back, now stood united, their strength shining through. I stood beside the chief, my heart full. I had done it. We had done it. The tribes were united, stronger than ever before. We were no longer just two separate people fighting for survival. We were a force, bound together by our shared strength, our shared vision. As the fire crackled and the stars rose overhead, I knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be more challenges, more battles to fight. But as long as we stood together, we would face them as one. The future was uncertain, but in that moment, standing with the Modoc and Shoshone, I knew that we could face anything. We had proven that when we stood united, we could overcome any obstacle, and no enemy could break us. The chief's words echoed in my mind. We are one. And in that unity, I found my true strength. I stood on the edge of the camp, watching the early morning mist rise from the valley. The air was still, the only sound being the soft rustling of the trees in the wind. The Modoc and Shoshone had united, and now we faced a new challenge, not a battle against an enemy, but the challenge of maintaining the fragile peace we had forged. The chief had entrusted me with a responsibility greater than I had ever imagined. As one of the leaders of our people, I was expected to hold the unity we had built together, to keep the alliance strong and ensure that our people remained united against any threats that might come our way. The weight of it pressed down on me every day, but I knew that it was a challenge I could not refuse. It was early in the morning when the scout arrived, his face tense with urgency. "The settlers are coming," he said. "They've gathered a large force. They've been pushing further into the land, and now they're heading our way." The words hit me like a blow. We had fought for this land, bled for it, and now, it seemed, we were going to be forced to fight again. The alliance between the Modoc and Shoshone was still fresh, and I knew this would be the ultimate test of our unity. If we stood together, we could push the settlers back. But if we faltered, if any crack formed in the bond we had built, everything would fall apart. The chief turned to me, his expression as calm as always, but I saw the weight of the decision in his eyes. "It's time," he said. "We will not let them take our land. We fight, but we fight together. The Modoc and Shoshone are one, and we will stand united, no matter what." I nodded, my resolve hardening. It was time to prove ourselves, not just as warriors, but as a people, as one. The days leading up to the battle were filled with preparation. The warriors sharpened their weapons, the women prepared food and medicine for the wounded, and the elders shared stories of the past, reminding us all of what we were fighting for. I spent hours walking among the warriors, speaking to them, reminding them of our strength, our unity. We had fought battles before, but this would be the most important one yet. The settlers were powerful, their numbers great, but we had something they did not. We had each other. The night before the battle, I stood at the edge of the camp once again, looking out over the land. The fires from the Modoc and Shoshone camps flickered in the distance, their light reflecting off the mountains that surrounded us. The land felt alive, like it was waiting for something, its power coursing through the earth. I knew that we were fighting for something much bigger than ourselves. We were fighting for the future of our people, for the preservation of our way of life. The chief approached, his footsteps quiet in the night. He stood beside me, looking out over the land as I was. "Tomorrow will be hard," he said, "but we have no choice. This is the land we were born to, the land we will fight for." His voice was soft, but I could hear the strength behind it. "I know," I said, my voice steady. "We will stand together. We will not let them take it." The chief turned to me, his gaze steady. You've proven yourself time and again, he said. But tomorrow, we need more than strength. We need your heart. We need your leadership. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I felt the weight of what he was asking of me. It was not just about fighting. It was about leading, about ensuring that the Modoc and Shoshone would remain united no matter what. I took a deep breath, my heart steady. I will not fail you, I said. The battle the next day was fierce. The settlers came in full force, their guns and cannons rattling the earth beneath our feet. But the Modoc and Shoshone stood firm. We fought as one, our warriors moving with precision, our unity evident in every strike, every maneuver. The earth seemed to tremble with our power, the land itself rising up to defend us. The settlers were strong, but they were scattered. We knew the land better than they did, and we used that to our advantage. The battle raged on, the air filled with the sounds of battle, the clash of steel, the shouts of warriors, the roar of the wind. But with each passing minute, I felt a strength within me, a fire that I had never known before. I fought alongside the chief, our movements in sync as we led the charge. The settlers began to retreat, their lines faltering, their spirits breaking. The battle was turning in our favor. As the last of the settlers fled into the distance, I stood beside the chief, watching the smoke rise from the battlefield. We had won, but the cost had been high. Many warriors had fallen, and the land was scarred with the remnants of the battle. The chief turned to me, his expression unreadable, but there was a glint of pride in his eyes. You led us well, he said. You have proven that the Modoc and Shoshone will never be divided. We fought for our land, and we have protected it. I nodded, my heart heavy with the weight of the victory. The land was ours, but the price we had paid would stay with us. We had proven our strength, our unity, and our resolve. But as I looked out over the battlefield, I knew that the fight was far from over. There would always be more battles, more challenges to face. But as long as we stood together, we would never falter. The Modoc and Shoshone were one, and nothing could break us. I stood with the chief at the edge of the camp, watching the last remnants of the settlers disappear into the distance. The land, though scarred by battle, seemed to breathe easier now. The Modoc and Shoshone had fought together and emerged victorious once again. But the price had been high. We had lost many, both warriors and civilians, and though we had repelled the settlers, there was a lingering feeling of unrest in the air. The land was ours, but it was clear that we could not rest on our laurels. The chief stood beside me, his expression unreadable, as always. The settlers will return, he said, his voice heavy with a wisdom that only years of battle could have taught him. They will come again. We cannot let down our guard. His words settled in my chest, a constant reminder that peace was never permanent in these parts. We had fought for the land, but now we had to fight for its preservation. Our enemies were not just those who came with weapons. They were the forces that sought to change the very fabric of the land. The Modoc and Shoshone had united, but the true test would be whether we could hold that unity together in the long term. As the days passed, I found myself torn between my role as a warrior and my new responsibilities as a leader. The tribe needed me to be strong, to guide them, and to make decisions that would affect not just our survival but the future of our people. I spent hours with the chief, discussing strategy and the next steps, but no matter how many plans we made, there was always a lingering doubt in the back of my mind. Could we truly keep this land? Could we keep our people safe? The chief seemed to sense my unease, though he never spoke of it directly. Instead, he asked me to accompany him to the northern edge of the valley. The land there was wild, untamed, and it had long been a place of refuge for our people. It was where the first battles had been fought to secure our survival, and it was where we would make our stand against any who threatened us. We rode together in silence, the weight of the land pressing down on us as the sun dipped low in the sky. The further we went, the more the land seemed to shift beneath us. The trees grew thicker, the ground rougher, and the air colder. When we reached the northern edge, the chief dismounted and turned to face me. "This land is sacred," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "It holds our past and our future. We fight for this, not just for survival, but for what we are, what we will become." I nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. The Modoc and Shoshone had fought side by side, but now, it was time to ensure that the bond we had forged would endure. The chief looked out over the valley, his gaze steady. You have shown that you are a leader, not just a warrior, he said. But now you must lead with your heart, with the unity of our people in mind. The Modoc and Shoshone are no longer separate. We are one, and we will stand together, no matter the cost. The words hit me harder than any blow in battle. I had led our warriors with strength, but now I understood what it truly meant to lead. It was not about strength in battle alone. It was about guiding our people, keeping them united in the face of adversity. It was about protecting the land that had given us everything. We spent the night at the northern edge, watching as the stars filled the sky above us. The chief spoke little, but his presence was a steady reminder of the burden we both carried. The next morning, we returned to the camp, the weight of the chief's words still heavy on my mind. The tribe was preparing for another assault, this time from a different threat. The settlers were not the only ones who had their eyes on our land. There were others, tribes that had long been enemies of the Modoc, eager to take advantage of our struggles. The chief called a council, and the warriors gathered once again. We were prepared for the fight, but the uncertainty of the future weighed on all of us. This is no longer just about survival, the chief said, his voice steady but grave. This is about protecting what we've built, about protecting our future. We fight not just for our land, but for the generations that will follow. The words echoed in the silence of the camp, and I could see the fire in the eyes of the warriors. We had fought for survival before, but this was different. This was about securing a future for the Modoc and Shoshone, one that would last beyond our lifetimes. We could no longer afford to fight for today alone. We had to fight for tomorrow. The battle that followed was brutal. The enemies came from all sides, their forces overwhelming at times, but the Modoc and Shoshone stood firm, their unity unshaken. I fought alongside the warriors, my heart steady, my mind clear. Every swing of my blade, every move I made, was for the future of our people. The battle was long, but in the end, we emerged victorious. The enemy forces were driven back, their numbers scattered. The chief stood beside me once again, his expression unreadable. But when he spoke, his words were filled with pride. You have proven yourself, he said. Not just as a warrior, but as a leader. I looked around at the warriors, the women, the children, our people. We had fought together, and we had won. The future of the Modoc and Shoshone was secure, but I knew that the true victory was in the unity we had forged. We had stood together, and we would continue to do so. The road ahead was uncertain, but we had shown that as long as we stood together, there was no force strong enough to break us. I stood at the edge of the camp, the sun slowly sinking behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the land we had fought so hard to protect. The Modoc and Shoshone, once two separate tribes, now stood united as one. The struggles, the battles, the losses, none of it had been easy, but it had shaped us into something stronger, something unbreakable. As the chief spoke, his voice was calm, but there was a weight to his words that carried the history of our people. This land is our legacy, he said, his eyes sweeping across the warriors and families gathered around the fire. We have fought to protect it, to preserve what is ours. But the fight is never truly over. We must continue to stand together, to honor the sacrifices of those who came before us, and to ensure that our future remains secure. His words echoed in my heart, a reminder that the peace we had earned was only temporary. There would always be challenges, always more battles to face, but as long as we stood together, we would overcome them. The days of uncertainty had passed, replaced by the quiet strength that came from knowing we had built something lasting. Our unity was no longer just a dream, it was a reality. I looked around at the faces of the people, the warriors, the women, and the children. They had become my family, my tribe. I had once been an outsider, a runaway, uncertain of where I belonged. But now I was home. The chief turned to me, his eyes steady, filled with a pride that I had never imagined he would show. You have led us well, he said, his voice carrying a quiet reverence. Not just in battle, but in unity. You are one of us, now and always. The weight of his words settled in my chest, but I knew that the real victory lay not in the battles we had won, but in the bond we had formed. We had come together as two tribes, and through that unity, we had found strength. The fires of our people crackled in the night, and the stars above seemed to shine a little brighter, as if they too recognized the victory we had achieved. We were no longer divided. We were no longer weak. We had forged a future together, one that could not be taken from us. The land was still ours. The Modoc and Shoshone had shown the world what true unity meant, and in doing so, had carved out a place for us in the future. I stood beside the chief, looking out at the camp, the faces of the warriors, the laughter of the women, the children running through the firelight. I had not known what my future held when I first arrived, but now I knew that it was here, among these people, in this land that I would stay. The world was full of uncertainty, but for the first time in my life, I felt certain of where I belonged. We had proven that, no matter what came next, we would always stand together. The future was ours, and together, we would face whatever came our way. Discover an epic journey in these thrilling Western stories, where two tribes unite to defend their land and way of life against growing threats. Set in the rugged wilderness, the Modoc and Shoshone tribes must stand together to protect their future from powerful enemies. As the tribes face battles, make alliances, and forge a new path for survival, these Western stories explore themes of unity, leadership, and sacrifice. In this powerful tale, a woman rises from being an outsider to a leader, proving that strength is not just in battle, but in the bonds we create. Through hardship and conflict, these Western stories will take you on a ride through fierce battles, deep friendships, and the timeless struggle for survival. Witness how the Modoc and Shoshone tribes fight for their legacy, their land, and their people, all while uniting in the face of adversity. This is the essence of Western stories, where warriors, wisdom, and resilience shine through the darkest times. The journey is filled with twists and turns, yet the true heart of these Western stories lies in the strength of unity and the courage to protect what matters most.